And we do thank you so much for having us live right here. My name is Tony. We're having this very exciting and interesting program that we're having, working together with Amnesty International, where we're going to be talking to various candidates that are going to be coming in for this upcoming harmonized election that is left with some few days as far as Zimbabwe general election is concerned. Today, we are so much excited and honored to have a candidate, Mr. Gumbo, who is also representing Hatfield. We are so much happy and excited to have you, sir, and thank you so much for joining us on this show.
Thank you for having me. I'm also excited to be here and to discuss on the issues of national importance.
Great, and a few days left before we hold these elections. Are you ready? Are you prepared? And is the electorate fully confident of what you guys are standing for?
I think the people of Zimbabwe are ready. The people of Zimbabwe are ready for the opportunity they have on the 23rd of August to turn around the fortunes of this country and to redirect the developmental and progress trajectory of our country. So we are very much prepared. It's all systems go. Our polling station agents are all trained and ready to go and man our various polling stations across the country and also across the constituency. So we are indeed ready, and we are confident that we come the 24th of August, President Nelson Chamisa will be the president of this country and gearing up to form the next government of Zimbabwe.
All right, so let's just speak into issues that define what your electorate stands for. Us as Amnesty International, we are worried about issues of democracy, human rights, good governance, and all that. And despite the provision in the Constitution to uphold these fundamental rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, Zimbabwe has a long history of stifling these rights, especially with the most recent enactment of the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Amendment Bill 2022, commonly referred to as the Patriotic Bill. Civic space continues to shrink, with activists, journalists, political party members being arrested for criticizing the government. We need to fully understand here, what will you do to ensure that the authorities implement Zimbabwe's constitutional and international obligations relating to the right of freedom of expression and the rights to information?
Well, the starting point will be to acknowledge that the problems we have as a country today are as a result of bad leadership. The human rights violations, the lack of observance for the rule of law, the lack of constitutionalism in this country is not because Zimbabwe does not have a constitution, but it's because Zimbabwe has bad leaders. It's because Zimbabwe has leaders who are retentionist in their thinking, who are determined to keep the citizen quiet, even in the face of the various economic decay, the various shrinking of the democratic space in this country. So our commitment as the CCC is to say, look, we will be loyal to the Constitution. We will ensure that there's full implementation of our constitutional and even international obligations. That is what is required. If leadership is corrected in this country, we do believe that we have a constitution that works. Yes, it might have its issues here and there, but we do believe that, again, if a leadership is committed to constitutionalism and the rule of law, we will put in place frameworks that ensure that we open up the democratic space. We will open up spaces that ensure that we modernize our democracy. We will ensure that there is observance of the rule of law, and we will ensure that we preserve the obligation and the mandate that the civic society has, which is to ensure good governance and to provide platforms through which citizens can hold their government to account. So we don't believe in stifling opposition. We don't believe in stifling the freedom of expression. We don't believe in stifling even the freedom of assembly. We believe that people's rights must be observed and people must be allowed to enjoy their country without fear of those that are in leadership. So we will correct the leadership problem. We will correct the leadership mindset, which is within its PF, and ensure that people enjoy their freedoms in this country.
Us as Amnesty International, we've made recommendations in the past to repeal the POSA, the Public Order and Security Act, the Access to Information Act, Protection and Privacy Act. Though some of the provisions of the POSA were amended through the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act, police have continued to use MOPA to stop some opposition rallies and to criminalize gatherings by some CSOs. What is your position on the issue of MOPA to stop or the interference with the rallies and various CSOs as far as this matter is concerned? What is your position with this issue?
Well, to start with, the CCC government is going to, scrap out all draconian legislation in this country. It's either we're scrapping out legislation or we are going to amend properly legislation to allow that all legislation we have is in alignment with the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So, we do know exactly what happens with, our police services, our police force, as it is known now, that sometimes there is interference by political parties, particularly ZANU-PF, to ensure that there is limitations to what the opposition in this country can do. So, we will reform the law, and we will ensure that any law enforcement agents in this country adheres strictly to its mandate, adheres strictly to its obligation. And that, what is that obligation? At top of everything, it is to protect the people of Zimbabwe, to protect the citizens of Zimbabwe, and also to protect the constitution of this country. So we will deal with all draconian legislation. We will repeal any law which is not in alignment with the constitution, and we will amend particular laws to ensure that they are in alignment with the constitution. But top of everything, we will make sure that the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, and all political rights which are guaranteed by the constitution are enjoyed without limitation, without fetter.
During the tenure of the current government, the Parliament and the Senate fast-tracked 2 pieces of legislation which have serious implications on the enjoyment of freedom of assembly, association, and expression. The 2 laws, the Criminal Codification and Reform Act, are commonly known as the Patriotic Bill and the Private Voluntary Organization (PVO) Bill, which are badly drafted and contain unconstitutional provisions that have been castigated by the general public and criticized by the international community as well. We need to understand what is the position of these 2 pieces of legislation. What will you do as a member of parliament to promote and protect these freedoms that are important for the opening up of the civic space?
Well, our president is committed, and we also commit as his parliamentarians to say the moment we are voted into office, we are going to deal out with the Patriotic Bill, because we believe that true patriotism rests in the heart. True patriotism cannot be legislated, so you cannot seek to thwart the voices of the people or the voices of dissent by limiting what people can say and what people cannot say. So we will deal out with the Patriotic Bill, and will ensure that we inculcate a culture of love for one's country. But how do we do that? By ensuring that we provide an environment which is free for everybody and free for all. There's nothing wrong with protection of public order. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's everything wrong if we then use such instruments to thwart opposition, to thwart voices of dissent, to thwart the freedom of expression. So again, we will commit as a parliament, we commit as a government, under the CCC, to deal properly with amending these provisions or these legislative frameworks to be in alignment with the Constitution. Remember, we all acknowledge that our Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any legislation which is not in alignment with the Constitution must be dealt with. We must amend it. ZANU-PF has failed over the past years. Since 2013, when this current Constitution came into effect, ZANU-PF has been struggling to amend legislation, many legislations across the board, to align to this Constitution. So that is our first order of business when we're in Parliament, to ensure that we bring to table all legislation and all legislative provisions which are not in alignment with the Constitution, and deal with that, so that we correct the wrongs that have been, put in place by ZANU-PF in this country.
All right. During and after the national tear that happened in January 2019, at least 15 people were shot and killed by the security forces. Over 78 were treated for gunshot wounds, and over 1,000 were arbitrarily arrested, and hundreds have been prosecuted in the fast-track trials on the charges of public violence and subverting a constitutionally elected government. We need to understand, as far as this case is concerned, also the army shot and killed 6 people. A commission of inquiry report, famously called the Montante Commission, was inquired into the killings and stated that the deployment of these soldiers was unjustified and disproportionate. None of these suspected to be responsible for the killings have been brought to justice. We need to understand, what are your views on how the police respond to protests and rallies in Zimbabwe?
Well, you see, the state must not pry on its own citizens. Those who are in power and government must not pry on those who do not have guns, but those who seek to enjoy their basic human rights in this country. So we do believe that there is need for us to go and reform our law enforcement legal frameworks. We do believe that we need to amend the Police Act. We do believe that we also need to institute community-based policing. We also need to ensure that we train our police service. And I say police service, why? Because the commitment from our president is that once we are elected into office, we will change our police from being a police force to being a police service, so that it serves the people of Zimbabwe. We have ghosts of yesteryear, we have history of conflict in this country, which we believe has not been resolved. 43 years after independence, we have wounds which have not been covered, talk of the Gukura Hundi problems. So there's no genuine commitment by the ZANU-PF government to true transitional justice. So as the government, as the CCC government, We are committed to true transitional government, which is based on restoration, which is based on reconciliation, and which is based on transformation of our various societies. So we will transform how we police this country. We don't want a police state. We don't want a government that uses the police, the soldiers, and security forces to retain power. We want a government that employs these security services to safeguard the sovereignty of the country and to safeguard the rights and interests of the people of Zimbabwe. So as a government, we will do things differently. As a government, we will make sure we put even in place an independent complaints commission. What will it do? To ensure that if there is any citizen who is unfairly treated by the security services, there is a genuine commission which deals with those complaints, investigates the complaints, and makes sure that if there is need for compensation, citizens are compensated for excessive actions perhaps which might be employed by our security services. But on top of everything else, every person who is employed by the police, every person who's employed by the army, every person who's employed even by our intelligence services must learn human rights, must understand human rights, must breathe human rights. It must be, embedded within their fiber of service to know that the citizen comes first. The citizen is at the center.
We still have got a lot of police officers today and certain politicians who are moving around. They've not been arrested. What are you going to be doing with this culture of impunity that has been going on for years?
Well, part of transitional justice phenomenon is that whoever is investigated and found to be guilty of any atrocities must be brought to book. There cannot be healing if there's no acceptance. There cannot be healing if there also is no compensation. There cannot be true healing if we do not bring to book those perpetrators. So, as a government, we are truly committed to ensuring that any person, regardless of your position, whether you are an elected official or whether you are an appointed official or whether you are an employed official who works for the state and has power, will make sure that you are not immune to prosecution. You are not immune to prosecution because of your position. If you embark on criminal activity, you must be brought to book. So we will change the culture of our policing. We'll change the culture of how we enforce our laws in this country and end the culture of impunity. No one must become immune because they belong to a ruling political party. It's not how countries or governments must be run.
Let me just jump in quickly to arbitrary arrests and detention. We've seen this for a very long time, where during the tenure of the current government, the opposition political party members, supporters and activists were subjected to arbitrary arrests and unlawful detention in unfair trials. On 6 February 2022, police arrested 10 party supporters in Copaguero during a roadshow to canvass for votes ahead of the past by-elections. They were released without any charge 2 days later. On 30th of May, Joanna Mumumbe and Simon Marola and Cecilia Chimchinembe were also arbitrarily arrested in Harare after leading an anti-government protest taken to a police station, and they were forced even unmarked a vehicle. What will you do to ensure the correct application of the law and ensure that critics of the government are allowed to express themselves without any fear, harassment, or arrest as far as that various rights are concerned?
Right. Firstly, of course, Antonio, we will end this culture of partisan appointments. Partisan appointments wherein those who are in authority, those in government, are placed in certain positions, individuals that they think are aligned to the party for purposes of protecting what they call their interests. So we'll end that culture. We'll ensure that when there is any promotion that happens within the police force, when there's any promotion that happens in the army or in any security sector, it is based on merit. It is based on experience. It is based on a track record of people who serve the people of Zimbabwe as opposed to serve political parties. So partisan policing will be a thing of the past under a government under a Triple C government. Partisan policing will be history in this country under Nelson Chamisa. So we will end that so that we guarantee protection of the citizen by the police force. So we talk of a lot of arrests that have happened over the past. We talk of activists who have been abducted, activists who have been tortured, activists who have undergone heinous acts by those who are in the police force or in the army, so on and so forth. We have got to ensure that there is healing. For Zimbabwe to move forward, we've got to make sure that we deal with the ghosts of yesteryear. We've got to make sure that we deal with the ghosts of conflict in this country. We've got to make sure that we put an end to this culture of political intolerance in this country, so that everybody is able to express themselves freely. Everybody is able to express their political desire without fear of victimization or without fear of arrest. So we're going to change that. Like I said when I started here, that we've got to change the leadership mindset, we've got to change the governance mindset, we've got to change the culture of political polarization in this country, to allow these institutions like the police and any other commission to work freely and to serve the people of Zimbabwe before serving anyone.
On the 20th of April 2021, the High Court set aside the prosecution of opposition on charges of publishing and communication false statements, ruling that he had been arrested and prosecuted based on a non-existent law. Would you agree that the police and the National Prosecuting Authority and the magistrate as well, they need to be capacitated as far as these legal issues are concerned?
Indeed. There is need for us to go back to these key institutions of this country. And ensure that we train them, ensure that they are trained in proper human rights, observation and preservation, to ensure that they are trained in proper procedure, policing procedure, and proper security procedures. That does not hinge on the desire or need to protect partisan interests. So there is need for us to go back to our courts and divorce our courts from state interference, divorce our courts from partisan interference, divorce our police and our army from interference by government practitioners. So we are going to do that as the government of Nelson Chamisa, as the government of the CCC, to allow the people of Zimbabwe to exist in a community or in an environment where they are not afraid of getting arrested. We want police to be able to interact with our elderly, assist our elderly in this community, interact with our vulnerable, assist the vulnerable, as opposed to, spend time like chagana, arikuopoza ZANU-PF ndiani. We must allow practitioners of politics to practice their politics freely, to practice their politics without fear of victimization. That is the Zimbabwe we want. That is the Zimbabwe we dream of, and that is the Zimbabwe we must usher in on the 23rd of August 20.
According to the UNHCR, Zimbabwe approximately has 300,000 people that are currently at risk of being stateless. Amnesty International in its report entitled "We are like stray animals" documented struggles of the descendants of the migrant workers from neighboring countries who were brought in by colonial authorities to work on farms and mines around the country, from Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia, with a lot of these people coming all over the world. In 1984, Citizenship Act is also not the 1984 Citizenship Act is not also in harmony with the 2013 Constitution, in that it prohibits citizens from acquiring dual citizenship, and yet the Constitution provides for dual citizenship for anyone that is born here in Zimbabwe. We need to understand, from your perspective, what is your position on hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans who remain stateless or are at risk of statelessness due to the lack of access to this basic documentation?
Well, I think the Constitution has already dealt with this issue. What lacks, therefore, is the commitment to align our citizenship law to the Constitution. So that is one first thing we are going to do regarding the citizenship issue, to make sure that we sit down and we revisit our Citizenship Act so that it can align to the Constitution, and we allow all those that are deserving of citizenship in this country to be granted the rights, to be granted the security of the citizen. So this is our position, that look, we cannot exist in a country where we require these people for one thing, but we also deprive them of their rights, which will basically flow from them being citizens of this country. So we are going to deal with that issue through our Home Affairs ministry. We are going to deal with that decisively, ensure that the Constitution is observed, and ensure that all these descendants who are by constitutional provision allowed to be citizens of this country are given this benefit, and they enjoy this benefit. And we end this stateless phenomenon which now exists in a modern, in this modern day and age. We cannot have people who live in our country and we still refuse to recognize them, and yet they've been in this country for the past 40 years. They've been in this country for over 50 years.
What do you do with these descendants? We know we've got lots of migrants who today they don't even have birth certificates or any birth records or any national records that show that they're citizens of Zimbabwe. What are you going to be doing about such citizens?
Well, the first point is to amend the Citizenship Act, because the biggest barrier is the Citizenship Act, which is archaic, which is in non-conformity with the Constitution. So we deal with amending that. But now you talk of issue of documentation, Tony. The issue of documentation is not only a problem for descendants of migrants, so on and so forth. It is also a problem for Zimbabweans. It is also a problem for local citizens, for citizens who were born here to a Zimbabwean mother and a Zimbabwean father. Go to our, Registrar General's office today, and you realize the chaos that is there. Why? Because we have failed to digitalize, our registry. We have failed to properly equip our registry department so that it can offer and proffer the service it must to the people of Zimbabwe. So we are going to deal with that and ensure that there is no citizen who roams around Zimbabwe without a document, without an identity document, because it is a right. It is a right for those that we call migrants. It is a right for those that we call descendants of these migrants. It is a right for even citizens of this country. So we need to go and capacitate the RG's office. We need to go and ensure that we decentralize the issuance of birth certificates. We decentralize the issuance of IDs. We decentralize even the issuance of passports, so that it's easy for people to access these very important documents. So that is the commitment that we give.
This seems to work easily for the urban community.
Yes.
What strategy do you think can be deployed, or must be deployed rather, for those coming from the rural community?
So this is where the decentralization conversation comes in. To say we can't have things that are centralized at province level or centralized at national level. We want to decentralize to make sure that in every district you are able to walk into the Registrar General's office and you get your passport. You are able to walk in and you get your ID. You are able to walk in and get your birth certificate. In fact, birth certificates must be issued at the hospital. The moment you give birth to your child, you must be able to register your child for a birth certificate at that level. When you go home with your child with a birth certificate, which already carries, I know there's already a system where the ID number is given upon issuance of the birth certificate. But we want to go beyond that, to say when you are born, you are given a birth certificate at your hospital, you are able to then also be on the voters' roll. At that time, when you reach the age of 18, you quickly migrate to the voters' roll. When you reach the age of 16, you walk to your district office and you get your ID, you get your passport. It must be easy. We mustn't make these issues difficult. And it all begins with us correcting the problem of leadership in this country. We must amend it, but we believe that we need to modernize our citizenship laws to be in conformity, number one, with our constitution, and also to be in conformity with international institutions and instruments that deal with the question and issue of citizenship.
Why is Zimbabwe not ratified the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, despite calls to deal with this issue? As far as you are concerned, what do you think is the reason why we have not dealt with this issue?
Well, because we need to first deal with our own legislation. We need to deal first with our own framework. Before we can jump and adopt and jump and ratify international instruments, we must first ensure that our domestic instruments are well aligned. We must ensure that our domestic instruments are aligned to the Constitution and aligned to these international instruments. So yes, what do we need to do? We need to have a true commitment to dealing with the question of citizenship, to dealing with the question of the framework, legal framework of citizenship in this country. So that's perhaps why the lack of commitment, the lack of leadership, bad leadership, and the lack of transparency within the ZANU-PF of government is what has led us to this position today.
Let's speak about the issue of death penalty. Recently, we saw the murder of the 7-year-old boy, Tapio Mokore, was recently murdered, and those that have been accused over the matter, a recent judgment was made over them, and the death sentence was put over their lives as well. There's also only one death sentence that is imposed by the courts in 2021 and none in 2022. The president further confirms to commit death sentences in every year further, demonstrating that we will not have the death penalty abolished. However, the process is yet to begin. What is your view as far as this issue of death penalty is concerned?
Look, the death penalty, I believe, is a very archaic form of punishment, and we believe that in this modern day and age, we must be able to move away from the death penalty. So we will indeed advocate. I'll be a member of parliament, and I'm confident about it. And one of my issues, the things that I'm going to advocate for also in parliament, is to the abolition of the death penalty. We must deal away with it. We must conform to modern legal frameworks. We must conform to modern tenets of constitutionalism. The right to life. Life is, the sanctity to life must be protected. We must preserve the right to life, regardless of the acts or heinous acts that one can commit, there surely are other, ways of penalizing this criminality than to kill someone. So we need to deal away with the death penalty. That is my position, and that is the position that we will be advancing even in Parliament, so that we interrogate other punitive mechanisms that can be employed aside from taking one's life, which is guaranteed by the Constitution of this country. Yes.
I agree. Pregnant women and girls face barriers in accessing public health facilities, especially for maternal and sexual reproductive health rights. At times, this results in life-changing injuries. If you are a report by Amnesty International titled "Never Thought I Would Heal from This" revealed that pregnant women and girls are at risk of life-changing childbirth-related injuries, including obstetric fistula, as many shun public health care facilities in favor of maybe home-based delivery systems due to inadequate health infrastructure, cultural practices, and high costs within the hospitals. If you're elected to power, what will you do to ensure that there's access to public health facilities, including maternal, sexual, and reproductive health for women?
Well, we have to accept that our public health system has totally collapsed under the rule and leadership of ZANU-PF government. We need to accept that today you walk into Parenya, it's as if you are being condemned to death. You walk into a village maternity center, you either find one midwife with no equipment to use. And as a result, to date, we have over 22,000 women in this country, in this day and age, who die during childbirth because our maternity wards are not properly equipped and they are understaffed. So we've got to commit, and we are committed as the Triple C government, to say once we get into office, once we are elected by the people of Zimbabwe and trusted with the reins of power, primary health care must be made free. And then we must then do serious resource advocacy, and we ensure that we fund adequately our health institutions, ensure that they are well equipped, they are well resourced, and ensure that we have the best doctors and the best health workers in the world. You can tell this by the demand that is there internationally for Zimbabwean doctors and Zimbabwean nurses. But here back at home, people are dying of snake bites. Children are dying during childbirth. Mothers are dying during childbirth. Our girls are dying from reproductive health issues. Things which, as a government, you must be able to properly deal with. You can't have in this day and age people who die during childbirth. You can't have that. You can't have people who die because there's no electricity in the maternity ward. So we must capacitate our health institutions. It's a priority for the Triple C government to ensure, number one, free primary health care, to ensure, number two, that public health institutions are not a death penalty to the citizens. Public health institutions must restore confidence in those, so that the people of Zimbabwe, because a healthy community and a healthy citizen means or gives for a productive nation. So we are committed to dealing with those issues. Sexual reproductive health issues, we are committed to that. There is the cultural component which you raise, Tony, and correctly so. What do we have to do with that? Culture is dynamic. But at the same time, the government has an obligation to ensure that we go back to our communities and educate communities. Educate communities to say, look, there are issues such as child marriages which have ravished, some communities in this country, which have led to some deaths during childbirth. When a young person is made to be a mother before they are actually matured enough to do so, it might be fatal to the health of both the baby and the mother. So what do we have to do with those situations? Of course, we have laws and legal frameworks that protect against child marriages, that protect against statutory rape issues, so on and so forth. But we've also got to do advocacy in our communities, which is why, again, I'll come back to the issue of civic society. They have a role to play in that. So we cannot steal for the space for the civic society, because they are also part of the organizations and the groups that go back to our communities and educate our communities about these things. So we also have a mandate and a duty. Again, we believe that what we are going to establish post-23 August is a consensus state. It's a state that is consultative. It's a government that consults the citizens. Consulting citizens goes beyond just asking them, what do you want us to do for you? It also goes to us going to educate our communities about issues that they might not know, particularly regarding health and reproductive health.
In the research by Amnesty International, it was evident that early forced marriage is a cause for obstetric fistula. There are laws now in place to curb early forced marriages, but it's still happening. What will you do as a parliamentarian to stop the impunity that is being enjoyed by those practicing early forced marriages in and around Zimbabwe?
Well, number one is we of course going to be strict with our law. We are going to be strict with the laws that prohibit child marriages, but we are also going to be proactive in terms of ensuring that our communities know what the law says. We are going to be proactive through the police, proactive through various ministries, the Ministry of Health, and all relevant ministries, so that our communities are educated, so that our communities I know there's a conversation around certain practices which are harbored in particular churches, so on and so forth. We believe that we must open a platform for conversation with the leadership of different communities. Our chiefs must play a role. Our sabukus, our headmen must play a role. Our pastors in churches must play a role. Our community leaders must play a role. The civic society must play a role. And we must allow for this role to be played. We must allow the space for all these critical stakeholders of the state to play a role in educating our communities and educating our people against forced child marriages. There is a future for these children. But most importantly, again, we must improve our economy, Tony, and ensure that these children are able to go to school. Because some of these forced marriages, let's be honest, is because the parents cannot afford education. That's why we have said free basic education for every child in this country, so that children can go from grade 1 to grade 7, realize the full potential. Children can go up to Form 6 and up to university, realize their potential, and the girl child can be saved from being forced into marriages for sustenance. We must allow for an improvement of our social services, so that no one is forced by circumstances to go into or to force their children into child marriages, because tatambura zvino mwana wedu ndiye atinaye tatadza kumuendesa kuchikoro, saka we are going to commit this child to marriage to this rich mbinga or to this so and so who can take over the child. We are going to end that. We improve the economy. We improve the standards of living in this country. We allow children to go to school. Children belong to school. Young children belong to the school and not to the bedroom.
What is your view on the issues? I think we use the last but not least question. As far as we've got a lot of teenagers and girls accessing contraceptives and information on sexual reproductive health issues, what is your view and your understanding as far as these issues for girls, younger girls, to be accessing this kind of information?
Well, it is important that sexual reproductive health be taught in schools, not just as a subject, for examinations, but also as a life skill. We must provide platforms for young girls to be educated by trained people about reproductive health issues. We must also then ensure that as a government we put in place mechanisms that protect the girl child, that protects them and educates them about issues to do with contraceptions, issues to do with their sexual reproductive health, so that children, sometimes you have children who come from families who find it as an anathema to discuss sexual reproductive health issues. They must interface with such lessons at school. We must allow that, so that our children are conscious of the risks that lie. So that our children are conscious of the diseases that lie, in relation to sexual related issues. Yes.
We do thank you so much, Honorable Member, for sharing with us a very concise and interesting perspective in how best you're going to be solving and dealing with these issues as far as you incoming Member of Parliament and the legislator and the lawmaker by right is concerned. We do thank you so much, and we appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for having us. And to the people of Zimbabwe, we continue to say, to the people of Hatfield, I continue to say, we are committed to putting in place a government that is the people at the center, a government that is for everyone, a government that considers all and excludes none. Thank you.
That is how we have had here with Honorable Gumbo, representing Hatfield constituency in this upcoming election. And he's already outlined his issues as far as the human rights, access to information, and the girl child rights issues are concerned. We do thank you so much for having us live right here. This is Tony with Amnesty International today. We are so excited to look at you with respect to various candidates upcoming in this very exciting and interesting period ahead of the harmonized elections in Zimbabwe.
Thank you.